called A Complaint-Free World. And he asked me to look into it and check it out. And if there was an agreement, then to pick up a bunch of, or order a bunch of these bracelets, have them here, and then anyone who would want them, they could have them and just pick them up and take them out. And here's a little history of A Complaint-Free World, what it's kind of about. In July 2006, there was a minister by the name of Will Bowen, Pastor Will Bowen, and he offered this simple idea for people to monitor their success in eradicating complaining from their lives. And the idea really took off. It really exploded and went around the world, and nearly 10 million of these little complaint-free bracelets have been sent to people that are from 106 different countries in the world. And this is what Bowen has based his theory on. He says that scientists believe that it takes 21 days for a new habit to form, and complaining is a habitual habit for most of us. And Mark Twain had said this: we must coax our old behavior down the stairs. And the purple bracelet, really what it is, it's a simple tool to remind you of how well you are in creating your life, or filling your life with positive intention. And here are the ground rules: is you take one of these bracelets and you put it on your wrist, as so. Like I said, you got to stretch them out a little bit, because there's another issue with them in a while if you don't stretch them out. But you put it on your wrist, and when you catch yourself complaining or criticizing or gossiping or something of that nature, then you take that bracelet. Oh, shucks, you know, these bracelets, I wish they wouldn't rip your hair out like they do. I don't know what their problem is. There's a complaint, and then you take it, and then you go over to this side, and you put it on the other side. So each time you complain, you got to flip wrists. And the goal or the intent is to try to go 21 days without complaining. And once you do it, when you make it 21 days, well, then you start all over again. And here's another rule too: is if you hear somebody else that would complain, like Alden, you know, he was complaining about, you know, his football team from last year, the Chargers were really bad, and he was complaining. So if he complains about his football team, and he's got a purple bracelet on, and I know he's complained, I can point it out to him if I want to. But before I do that, I got to take my own bracelet, put it on my other arm, and then I can say, you know what, you just complained about your football team, the Chargers. Or maybe the best thing is just don't say anything at all, I suppose. But anyway, so those are sort of the ground rules. And 21 days, think about that for a moment. 21 free days of complaining. Yeah, it's really difficult to do that. It is really difficult to do that. I've tried it, and it's hard, and apparently, according to statistics, I don't know how they come up with some of this stuff, but the average person complains 15 to 20 times a day. I know, everyone kind of goes, whew. And, well, okay. And the average person who really gives their effort usually takes 4 to 10 months to eventually make it to 21 complaining-free days. 4 to 10 months, that's quite a broad thing. And this is not easy, but it's worth it, says Pastor Bowen. And Bowen states further, how do I know if I'm complaining? Well, to complain is defined as to express pain, grief, or discontent. And surely it makes sense to express pain, grief, or discontent occasionally, but most people do so constantly. And in so doing, they are talking and thinking about what they do not want in their life, and thereby attracting more pain and grief and discontent. Instead, think and talk about what you are grateful for. And if anyone would like a bracelet, I have the box here. There's still a bunch left. If you want to pick one up at the end of the service, you are free to do that. There's no strings attached. Really, it's just an idea. It is just one person's idea to try and bring positive change into the lives of people through encouraging them to think of other things that are brighter and better, and to focus on something brighter and better. And if you were to put a verse to it, I think maybe it would be this one from Matthew, from Matthew, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And in thinking about that whole complaint-free world and these bracelets, can you imagine if the children of Israel had been given a purple bracelet from that reading that Terry had read from for us this morning? I wonder if Moses and Aaron had wished that there was a few of those purple bracelets that they could have handed out. They really had their hands full while journeying through the desert, heading for this promised land. A 40-year journey of real fun, And they encountered it all. They were constantly handling grievances and issues of one kind or another from day to day. And verse 2, that very first verse that she read, in the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Now, it was probably not literally the whole community that was complaining, but there were an awful lot of them that were complaining. And you know, I just kind of think this, that more than likely that had I been among that crowd, I would probably be among the complainers. I'd probably be complaining too. I would not have wanted to go through what those people were going through. I mean, when you think about it, did they really want to leave Egypt? They most certainly did. They absolutely wanted to leave Egypt. Why wouldn't they have wanted to leave? I mean, they were in slavery, for goodness sake. Slaves in a land that was not their own. And so when Moses and Aaron came along with this news of promised land and that God had something better for them, freedom, that they would be slaves to no one anymore, and that there was something better for them, this promised land that was described as a land that flowed with milk and honey. Yeah, that sounded pretty good. That sounded pretty awesome. But how could this news of a promised land, how could all of that be authenticated? What made it all so believable? Well, it just seemed wherever this Moses went that there were these miraculous signs and wonders that followed him everywhere. And it was pretty wild stuff, too. For instance, maybe you remember this story. Moses had his staff, right? I guess I envision like a shepherd's crook. And this staff, and he's in the Pharaoh's courts, or his court, and he takes that staff and he throws it down onto the floor, and that staff turns into a snake. And Pharaoh, not about to be outdone, he calls upon his people, his magicians or his diviners, and they come and they throw their staffs on the floor. They turn to snakes, and then what happens is that Moses' staff, or a snake, swallows up all the other snakes right there. And the message was received loud and clear that God was demanding that his people be released, and God is the one and only true God, and there is no power on earth that can match his, because he is over all the earth. And then, of course, there were the 10 plagues, right? And Egypt did their best, or at least Pharaoh, he did his very, very best to resist God's intention of releasing the captives from Israel, but God was too much. And Pharaoh didn't know what to do with this guy named Moses, this servant of God. And the children of Israel, they're becoming more and more convinced that their freedom would be imminent. And the entire Egyptian empire couldn't do a thing about it. And after the 10th and final plague, where the firstborn of each household was taken, that was it. That was done. And Pharaoh let go. He relented. He said, go, get out. And now the real adventure began for Israel. And now they're in a real hurry. They're packing up, and they want to leave quick before Pharaoh could change his mind, or before anything else could happen that would impede their exodus from Egypt. You know, and I envision this thing. I think of parents whisking their kids out of bed and moving quickly on the promise of a better life, to a better life. And the intense departure out of Egypt, it was stressful. And there's people, they were young and old, moving as best as they could, and family members were likely helping one another, helping those who may have been a little less mobile as they were in their younger years. And then there were babies and children that were in the mix of all of this, livestock and whatever belongings that could be carried. If they were regarded as essential to their journey, they would grab. And they move out, and their heads are down. And they journey, and they put a few miles on, and then they discover that they're being pursued. Pharaoh had changed his mind. And they come to the Red Sea. And it looks like this is the end of the road. And what? What do you do now? And if the 10 plagues were regarded as miracles, this was the miracle of miracles as God parts the waters. And through they go, through the sea, and they make it safely to the other side, and their captors, whom they had been enslaved to for years, were swept away in that sea. And God was delivering them. And they were off to the promised land. It's just that this journey through this desert was so rough, and it was brutal, and they were hungry. And it's estimated that there were approximately 603,000 people that were part of this exodus. And they probably discovered that there were others who had found their way into the mix of this group of Hebrews as well. Some who might not have been Hebrew, but were fellow slaves, which they saw an opportunity to get out, and they took it. Regardless, after years of exile in one place, This would have been quite a mix of people. And to further add to it, they're hungry and they're thirsty, and they're also finding it very difficult to get along with each other too, because of it all. And yet, through it all, they're growing together. Of the whole community. They're becoming a singular people, and they have the same lament, a single lament. And they say, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat, and we ate all the food we wanted, but you brought us into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. You know what? I think that deep, intense need can make one's memory become very short. But what do you think? Is it a reasonable complaint? I mean, they left Egypt for a better place. And that better place was nowhere in sight. Back in Egypt, they risked their lives to get out. They risked their lives to leave. And their children, they risked their children's lives too. On a promise. But at what cost? To watch their kids starve to death? Because this promised land, it was nowhere in sight. And what they were seeing from day to day was this pillar of cloud and fire that was leading them, but leading them where? Well, it looked like it was leading them to more and more sand. But God heard their lament. And he did meet their need. And he sent quail at twilight. And that sounds pretty miraculous to me. Quail in the desert, daily, enough to feed 600,000 plus. And in the morning, manna from heaven fell from the sky. This bread from heaven to keep them going, to sustain them. To meet that hungering feeling that they are all feeling within them. And at that moment, Israel learned this, that God is attentive to the needs of people, to the wants of people. And he'll even hear their complaints. And I think that the provision of quail and manna demonstrate that he will provide for his people again and again, and he will go to extraordinary or use extraordinary measures when called for. And all of this takes place within the bounds of a relationship that is inscribed with each step of their journey. And I also think this. I think that sometimes there are some things in this world that are worth complaining about. And I think God wants to hear those complaints. And I believe that he wants us to bring them to him. Express what is in our heart. For example, we should be bothered by injustice. We should be praying for people who are victims of injustice, even taking up cause for them. And we should bring those kinds of complaints of injustice to God. Or the things that are happening deep within our own hearts, deep within our own hearts, that worry us, that bother us, that sadden us, or hurt us. We can bring these laments to God too. And God wants us to bring all of these to him and to bare our heart and soul to him. And God will hear them. And when we come to him, come in honesty and come with an expectant heart that really wants to meet with Jesus. Not just for relief from a moment of grief, but come with a heart that yearns for even more than this. And in John 6, last week we read the story of Jesus feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And Terry has just read the story that immediately follows, where Jesus and his disciples, they climb into a boat and they set sail to go across the other side of the lake just to get away to be by themselves for a while. But some within that crowd of 5,000, well, they couldn't get enough of Jesus. And they just had their bellies filled in a miraculous way. And they are bent on following Jesus by trying to figure out where he and the disciples were going. And they do find him. And they find him in this place called Capernaum. And they're excited to have found him again. Rabbi, when did you get here? And then Jesus responds, knowing that they're looking so hard for him. You've been looking for me. You've been looking for me not because of the divine, not because of the signs and wonders that were done for you, but because you ate loaves of bread until your bellies were filled up. You know, eating your fill one day and having that need of hunger or that hungering feeling met, having it disappear, it doesn't mean that it's not going to return the next day, does it? It'll return, it'll come back. When there's no food and you don't know how you will sustain your life from day to day, that's real stress. And it's a legitimate concern. And I don't think Jesus' response here is a scolding of that. But I think Jesus was hoping that they would be expecting more than this too. That they would be seeking the source. That they would be seeking the giver of the bread and not just the bread itself. And Jesus refers to that very passage that was read to us, Exodus 16. And he retells the story of manna from heaven, bread from heaven, and that it didn't come from some Egyptian deli that Moses and Aaron had concocted up in the desert, but it came from the Lord God. And the God who had delivered Israel from slavery would also sustain them in the desert. And he would walk with them always, if they would walk with him. And someone within that crowd following Jesus, they speak out, "Give us this bread. Give us this bread," they ask. And Jesus immediately answers and he says, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." I read a story this past weekend. It was of a young soldier who had lost his older brother and father in the Battle of Gettysburg. So that's going back to the 1800s. And so this young soldier, he decides he's going to go to Washington to see President Lincoln and ask for a military exemption so that he could go back to his home and help his mom and his sister with the spring plant. And he received the furlough long enough to allow him to do this. And so he goes to White House with the intent he's going to plead his case. And he reaches the front gate, and he walks up to that gate, and there's a guard that's on duty there. And he asks if, he says he needs to see the president. And the guard tells him to leave. And he says, "You know what, the president is busy. And you go back to the battle lines where you belong." Well, this young soldier, he's dejected, and he walks away from the gate, and he goes and he sits down somewhere, and he's trying to figure out his next move. And then a younger man, a boy really, comes by, and he notices the stress on this young soldier's face. And he asks, what's up, what's wrong? And this young soldier proceeds to pour out his heart to this young kid. And this young kid says, "You know what, I think I can help you. Come with me." And he led that soldier to the gate of the White House. They go through that gate, and no one batted an eye. And they walk past generals and high-ranking officials without a question being asked of them. And finally, they work their way into the White House itself, and they reach the Oval Office, and there the president is working, and this young boy, he didn't even knock, he just walked in with this young soldier following right behind him. And the president looked up and says, "Good afternoon, Todd, and who was your friend?" And Todd Lincoln said to the president, "Dad, this soldier needs to talk to you." And this young soldier pled his case, and right there, President Lincoln granted him the exemption that he was needing. Now, what's the point of all that? What's the parallel? Well, the parallel is that we have access to the Father because of Jesus Christ, who intercedes for us. He's the bread of life, who will fill our every longing. He will meet our every need. So seek more. Seek more than just a moment of relief from a particular thing, but rather seek moments, many moments, out of a lifetime. Seek a lifetime that is filled with moments that are woven together through relationship with the bread of life, Jesus, whom the Father has given to us. And going to Ephesians again, "And now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier and the dividing wall of hostility. For through him we have both access to the Father by one Spirit." We can bring it all to Jesus. And we can cast all of our cares upon him, as we had sung earlier. And what's on our heart, it matters to God. And asking God for the assurance that he is still with us is understandable and even appropriate. And so we come with an expectant heart that looks beyond a difficult moment, with a heart that yearns for more of God, a deeper connection with the Savior of our souls. And so let's come to communion again, as we are going to participate in these next few moments. Let's come to the table all over again, offering ourselves to him all over again through confession, through repentance, and of a yearning to stay near. And the longing within is met. That deep something that goes on is met when we come before Jesus with an expectant heart to have our hunger and thirst met. And what could we ever need or want that is more than this, more than that? So when we're hungry, when we're thirsty, we bring it to God. Let's sing together, all who are thirsty.